Hey, everybody, welcome back. My name is Terry Hunter. I'm an intuitive astrologer, and I'm here today to talk about Saturn's re-entry into Aries. The first 2 months of this re-entry are the most powerful of the whole transit, in my personal opinion, and that's what we're going to focus in on this video. Before I start, I just want to let you know that I did a video about Saturn being at 29 degrees Pisces, and I did a video about Neptune entering Aries. Both of these are relevant and sort of piggyback or contribute to this video, so you might want to check them out. And just for purposes of clarification, I'm going to keep the wheel on Saturn as I talk and as I go through the ultimate transits over the next couple of months so that you can see the focus here. In this video, we're going to look at Saturn's traits and characteristics in Aries. We're going to talk a little bit about Neptune's influence on Saturn. We are definitely going to talk about Lilith's influence on this conjunction because she is not often talked about. And then we're going to go through the key aspects for the time period between, February 13th and the end of April, when Saturn and Neptune will be about 7 degrees apart from each other. And the intensity of this transit will start to hopefully feel like it lightens up a little bit for us. And the lightening up will come because we have done the work of the transit of Saturn in Pisces and obviously Neptune, but mostly Saturn, because Saturn over the last 2 years has been commanding us to build strong structures with what is sustainable, what has clear boundaries, what comes from the soul's voice, whether it be creative, dreamy, and appear lofty. Saturn's not necessarily concerned with that in Pisces. What Saturn's looking for is diligence and discipline in your goals and endeavors. So I think this continues as we move into Aries. Saturn in Aries is bold, and it's a bold exploration of the self, a redefinition of the self. Saturn is often not is referred to as the repressor, the limiter, the man, the restrictor. But Saturn is the great teacher, the wise one. Saturn is not necessarily a personal planet, but rather a planet in your chart that's going to influence the longevity of your endeavors, the sustainability, the strength of your structures. Wherever Saturn is in your chart, that's where Saturn is building. So this characteristics of Saturn here is very, very resourceful. I kind of think of Saturn, while we don't talk about it, I believe Saturn is a welcomed guest in Aries. As Mars is exalted in Capricorn, this sort of strategic planning that happens when these two planets come together and the bravery and the leadership that can be offered are unparalleled. But oftentimes in human nature, we default to the lower vibrations of a lot of these planets. So here, Saturn is on the world axis, conjunct Neptune and Lilith, offering us a complete renovation of the self through the eyes of spirit, and to understand our raw instinctual nature and not to back down under the pressure of broken systems. I'm just looking at my notes real quick. Sorry if I got quiet. I want to talk about some of the gifts that Saturn offers. We talk about Saturn in such a negative way, and yet without Saturn in our chart, nothing would last. We wouldn't learn from our mistakes. So Saturn offers a structure and order so that civilization is not chaotic, and that's through laws and government and social structures, systems, and boundaries. Saturn offers us discipline and responsibility by being able to self-regulate and take accountability. We become the wise one. We learn from our mistakes and we mature rather than repeating our mistakes and letting fear grip us into paralysis. We don't Saturn rules time and thereby patience. But to me, patience isn't about holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. It's understanding the cycle of the universe, of nature. And because Saturn rules agriculture, Saturn best teaches us through growing and planting and building structures, how one thing leads to another. So when Saturn moves into Aries, it's about rebuilding the self, how one thing will move into another. And we'll be able to have our skills be more celebrated. Saturn will help us to build things that are meant to last. Saturn rules boundaries and, sometimes they say limitations, but there's safety involved. Saturn is exalted in Libra. Libra rules police and the peace and fairness and keeping the peace. So Saturn protects us. And sometimes that's through limits and containment because we are starting to walk on a ground that is unstable. So Saturn wants to make us aware of that instability and not do it again, thereby Saturn ruling wisdom. Now, with Saturn and Neptune coming together on the 0 degree of Aries, we're looking at a genesis moment of identity, of really bearing down on what do I believe about myself? What am I willing to be brave in my exploration of myself? What am I willing to do in allowing the structures that don't serve me to dissolve, to erode, to fade away in many ways? Saturn again will not necessarily, I don't think Saturn is a creative killer. When you look at Neptune as being dreamy and imaginative and sort of out of the box with that, I can't help but think of James Cameron and Avatar and movies like that that depict other worlds of fantasy. But so Saturn's not judging what you create, just Saturn just wants you to stick to it and to continue to lift the layers of impatience that makes you want to get to the goal's end. Saturn's the energy that says, if you're not going to do it right, don't do it at all. So now Saturn is going to say that about yourself, about how you define yourself. And Saturn is going to call upon you to be aware of any self-deceptions of being powerless, of anywhere that you are more focused on how other people perceive you than how you perceive yourself. Saturn in Aries, Aries is very much self-motivated. It is the me. It is I have come into this earthly experience in this dense physical body, and now I want to stretch it. I want to see what it's capable of. That's why Aries is the warrior, the competitor, the explorer, the hero. And in this conjunction with Neptune, Saturn is going to demand spiritual accountability in reclaiming your emotional self, your spiritual authority over yourself. It's going to ask you, where have you looked at life and given up your power to another structure, to the structure of marriage, to the structure of an employer, to the structure of limitation? Pisces by nature is porous, and it's not a strong energy to stand on. You think of the seas and the ocean, and everything is sort of rocky and wavy. Saturn, through its unemotional nature, can bring stability to those rocky seas. So there's no more victimhood, there's no more hiding, there's no more trauma bonds. You're kind of coming to a realization that the situations that you've been in that are eroding are giving you an opportunity to rebirth a stronger, more powerful, more intentional, more passionate, more creative, more successful, a victorious sense of yourself. When Saturn was at 29 degrees of Pisces, it was creating real world consequences for any lies, omissions, manipulations, deceptions, spiritual distortions, or misuse of spiritual gifts and tools. And there can be legal consequences attached to that, energetic, meaning you lose your energy, reputational consequences of that. So Saturn is on some level coming into this Aries energy fully aware of where it has been and where it doesn't want to go again. On the collective, we're going to see a big awareness of where there's been a slow erosion over the last 14 years of the self. The 12th house of Pisces naturally represents a time where the physical starts its transcendence back into the spiritual. So the body it's a death house, it's an ending house. But with the transit of Saturn, humanity will not end. So humanity is going to, the deceptions will die. The lies of the disempowerment of self, the lack of, I want to say it this way, because I believe that the hard road of achievement is best felt in the goal being achieved. And if it's done too easily, we don't feel that same exhilaration. So Saturn's endurance and discipline and responsibility are also the recipe for exhilaration and for feeling a sense of, I got this, and I am a co-creator in my own life. All right, now let's look at, real quickly, I want to talk about Lilith, because she is a powerhouse. This is Lilith right over here at 0 degrees of Aries. And I'm not going to focus too much on her as far as an individual, but how she's working with this collective. But let's talk about what she brings to the table. With Saturn, with Lilith, there's a confrontation of authority, law, consequences, where structures have enforced obedience at the cost of truth. Lilith represents this raw energy of feeling. Well, let me back up a little bit. Lilith is not an actual body. Lilith is a void. She's a mathematical point where the moon is the furthest away from the earth. And so this is where instinct outweighs the need for safety, approval, or containment. She is raw. She is unfiltered truth. She's that part of the psyche that refuses to submit, to soften, or be diluted because it suits the taste of others. She exposes what's been denied, shamed, exiled, or made to feel unacceptable in order to preserve the current outdated structures. Where she goes, false innocence collapse. And when I say that, those are the people who are like, I didn't know, or they play dumb, or they appear powerless, because she wants the moral compass to be exposed. And if it's only performance driven, if it's for basically, if it's a me win, you lose, Lilith is not taking that. She's very, very keen to speak up where people are trying to silence her voice. She will not take a blind eye, and she will not be silenced. She would rather be exiled. She would rather stand alone than to succumb to something that is not authentic to her and her truth. So now add that into the spiritual nature of Neptune and the new structure of Saturn. This is humanity, and each individual on the world axis starting to lay the bricks and the mortar to build a new house of self. So let's talk about the transits and how this is going to work. On February 13th, hold on, I just need to move my papers around for a second. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say about Lilith. In the past, we have, as a humanity, has given up a lot of their freedoms for security and safety in the form of money and material abundance. I think that this is where we're going to see a real rebel rousing energy of, I no longer want to be tied up in that golden noose. She's going to fight for her right to exist regardless of her material wealth or how she is perceived by others. She's going to give up victimhood, if there is victimhood. She has a sacred anger within her. She's not a fiery anger ball. She is angry for injustice, for the dumbing down of the soul and the truth of the soul that has inhabited a spiritual experience, a physical experience. She is a deeper truth that many want to refuse to see, because when they look at the darkness they've created in their lives or co-created, they only look at it from the human perspective rather than to see the co-creation and what benefit and wisdom can be extracted from what appears to be a dark, challenging, or limiting situation. So now let's go into the transits. So we see Saturn and Neptune and Lilith all making positive aspects to these outer planets, Uranus and Pluto. This is very important because this is where the psychological underbelly is. This is where, the powers that be, the control that Pluto rules. And this is where Pluto is activating Lilith and Neptune to help Saturn build a new you. And Uranus is here at the late degrees of Taurus, really wanting to bring awakenings to how your history and your unconscious or your lack of awareness of where you silence your own voice. This is pivotal because the voice is truly what I think is our self-confidence expressed. What I think is our Aryan energy expressed. And it also, the nature of Taurus is our skills. It is our talents. It is our ability to make our own money. And that's what Saturn wants to support. So these two outer planets are going to be in conversation with Neptune for quite some time. But with Saturn, it's just going to be the next few months. And even maybe a little longer than a few months. But the pivotal period is February to April. And this is all transformative. You've got to ignite this sextile. You have got to be willing to initiate something, take an action, have a thought, implement something that allows a forum or a platform for that epiphany to come in. Okay. And again, I want to emphasize that at this particular time, which is between the 13th and the 21st, we're going to see that this zero axis, this is such an important part of astrology's theories, or I'm not using the right word. When we look at that 0 degree of Aries, we are literally looking at the beginning of a cycle of karma, a cycle of choices, a cycle of awareness, a cycle of individuality. It's literally where the ego can either edge God out or embrace exciting God opportunities in this new phase of the soul's evolution. So I think that this is so important. Saturn does not move till the 22nd. It moves to 1 degree of Aries, and it's still in the conjunction. But again, here we are at this degree. And Christopher Witecki talks about the 0 degree of any sign being a Plutonian nature. And that here there has to be a willingness to guard and protect that which is sacred to what I love and what I want to experience. So I think this is really, really important. I'm going to go to February 17th. This day, we're going to have an eclipse. And I'm going to do a whole separate video on Saturn's influence on this eclipse. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But it's at 28 degrees of Aquarius. And while the eclipse is not making any aspects to Saturn and Neptune, I think it's important to be aware that Saturn co-rules Aquarius. So Saturn does have an eye on the future, which then further supports that Saturn, when we are willing to endure and be accountable for our co-creation, offers us these gifts. And this new moon eclipse is so incredibly powerful for the beginning of that experience in the material world. We're also going to see at the time of the eclipse that Venus is conjunct the North Node in Pisces. Let me click off Saturn for a minute. Here she is right here. This is so important because Venus is exalted in Pisces, and the North Node is what we're stretching for. So in the background, here's Mercury. Mercury's almost stationed to go retrograde. So there's a real powerful eclipse that is yearning you to step into those Venusian energies of using your voice, using your skills, being aware of your being energy that represents the being energy representing your self-confidence and your belief about what you're endeavoring. So this is super powerful. The past is as an opportunity in some ways to dissolve into giving life to, or giving energy to new life. Now I'm going to click back on Saturn and let's go to the 28th, where Saturn will be conjunct Neptune at 1 degree. Now Lilith moved very quickly, so she's starting to loosen her energy. But I will say what she is in the background, if you want to kind of think of it this way, with Saturn and Neptune sort of being co-stars in this transit, Lilith is the one who's willing to stand beside them, sort of like I almost think of her as a protector of the vision, a willingness to remember the raw instinctual nature in case we get off track or in case we start to swerve. We also see that Venus is starting this conjunction as she's getting into the last degrees of her exaltation. This is important because at this moment, we're looking at Saturn and Neptune. Really, kind of that 1 degree is where we're looking at the Aries energy. We're looking at our willingness to assert ourselves, to build structure once again for the things that I love that are not only from my soul's voice, but from my own sense of creativity and talents, and not judging those talents in a way that stops me from expressing them. And that's where Pluto continues to influence the bringing up that underbelly. And that can be, even though it's a sextile and it's a favorable aspect, it can be kind of challenging because we're looking at where power and control, where fear, Saturn also rules fear and restriction. Where has that been keeping me in a smaller position, keeping me less than, keeping me away from my dreams? We're going to have another eclipse on March 3rd. Again, I'm going to talk about these in more detail, so I'm just going to focus on Saturn here. Saturn is now moved past Neptune, and Venus is still in her exaltation. So what we're starting to see is that Saturn is starting to take the lead. Saturn is braving the ground of new beginnings. Saturn is laying the structure, but reminding us over and over again to use our voice to speak to the future of our own creativity, what we've imagined, what we dream. It's almost as if the new structure is not about a doing energy. It's about rooting in the individuality and the Aryan energy and being a peaceful warrior for your own rebirth. And say, not only, this is not about talking to other people about it, it's self-talk at this point. And I know we don't think of Venus as a talking planet, but she literally rules your opinion. So this is super important. Now, when we go to the 6th and until the 11th, we're going to see Venus has moved into Aries. Now, Lilith is no longer affecting this conjunction, but Venus is. And Venus is on the 0 degree, reinventing herself. Venus is in detriment in Aries. So according to astrologers, Venus is too hot. She's too self-assertive. She's not feminine enough in the Aries energy. Well, we're going to redefine that right now, just the way the planets are lined up. 0, 1, 2. We're going to see, who do I want to be in this new incarnation? What am I willing to do to be brave, to use my voice and protect my opinion of myself from those naysayers or people who would, laugh at me or try to humble me? I'm going to stay connected to spirit and what is most important to my heart. The 1 degree is the Aries degree, as I said a minute ago, but it's also the degree of the heart, the Leo degree in Christopher Witecki's step system. What is most important to your heart? What will you have the courage to pursue with your heart? And then we have Saturn at the second degree, which is what do I feel? The emotional dynamic of the degree system, where you're aware that your feelings aren't just feelings, they're also intuitive. They're also, your ability to connect to the spiritual realms through your emotional body to see if something feels true. Does it feel right? Or do I feel like I'm being, herded into a corral of things that I'm not interested in? We have a new moon in Pisces, 28 degrees on the 18th. Let's see what happens here. See, this is really interesting to me because when we get into those anaretic degrees, the anaretic degree technically is the 29th degree, but we're right up against it on the 28th degree, and that's the Cancerian degree. So there is this urgency and pressure and feeling to really address my emotional body and where my emotional body is trying to send me messages. And sometimes those messages come from what feels like anxiety or fear or confusion. So here, there's an opportunity with this stellium of planets to be aware that my emotional body is the way I express my light into the world. And when I connect with my creativity, when I connect to the higher realms of my being and I root it, I have so much potential to create bounty and rebirth for myself. This is Pluto's promise through its transit in Aquarius. Let's go to the end of March. I can hear my dog in the other room doing zoomies on my bed. She's so funny. Okay, end of March. Now we see that Saturn is at 5 degrees and it's in an exact uh, sextile to Pluto. Again and again, we are seeing Pluto and Saturn bringing up old stories, history, old toxic things potentially, where there's been power, control, where I've been, deceived, where I've been lied to, where I've not allowed myself through fear or trepidation or even not feeling secure out in the world to limit myself. Because again, we're activating something here. And at this moment, I really do think that with the 5 degrees, there's a sense of rebellion, there's a sense of Uranian energy to that. So I think around this time, you're going to find there's something that comes up and rubs up against your ego. And I'm not villainizing the ego when I say it, because without a healthy ego, you won't achieve anything in life. And the sun rules the zodiac and it's exalted in Aries. And the 11th degree here on this day indicates to me I'm aware of my thoughts. Many people say, oh, it's 11:11, make a wish, the angels are listening. And yes, indeed, they are. And so is the universe. Let's go now to April 3rd. Now, this is interesting to me because um, the quincunx to the south node. I'm not going to necessarily address the moon because the moon moves so quickly, but the quincunx to the south node. This is very interesting to me because it's like a blind spot. It's this weird tension that I can't put my finger on, but it nags at me and it feels a little bit like a blind side. These are old habits of thoughts of criticism. This could be an activation of Saturn's lower vibrations and even a little bit of Neptune's lower vibrations, not so much because we see the south node is 8 degrees. I like to keep the orb between 1 to 4, maybe 5 if I'm stretching it, depending upon the planets. But here, I really think this is potentially Saturn representing old stories, old, even authority figures, people who have some sort of dominion over me and a feeling of self-criticism. I'm not doing it right. I'm not a perfect. I'm not, this South Node in Virgo in its most challenging energy is very, very um, depleting. It wants to rewrite you into being fabulously flawed instead of perfect. And it could feel very difficult because in human terms, we're always stretching for perfection, to be the, beautiful and at all ages, and just unrealistic things, if you ask me. And here there is this also a challenge of whether or not your Neptune energy is realistic, because Saturn, I'm not Saturn, the South Node is challenging this. Is this sustainable? Have you been doing the work? Are you being consistent? Are you working daily towards your goals? And you may just have this creepy feeling like you're not doing enough. But I want to emphasize that the being energy is the most important when you endeavor something. And while I wasn't going to talk about the moon, I am going to bring it up because the moon represents what you feel. And what you feel is your being energy. The being energy is your attitude, your disposition, your viewpoint when you endeavor an action. So you may not see, because here's the moon is in Scorpio again, the underbelly. But Pluto wants to activate that so you can see it, it can come to the surface, and it can be transformed. Let's go now to the 7th of April. Mars is in the mix here. Mars is at those anaretic degrees of Pisces, and Mars in Pisces is not considered in its highest vibration because, here we've got the planet of fire in literally swimming across the seas. And at this point, Mars can see homeland and it can't wait to get there. But the tension here and the urgency comes from Mars learning to implement the peaceful warrior, the strategic warrior, the hero, remembering that competition is really never about beating someone else, but about achieving your best. And this is what Mars is being tasked to remember as it goes into its homeland and starts to feel his mojo all over again. I think this is really, really powerful. Sorry, Lulu had a moment. Somebody must be walking outside. You scared me. Okay, let's go to the 10th. And we see now that Mars is at that 0 degree. This again is Mars gets home, and I don't think Mars is all that uncomfortable as it moves into its homeland at the 0 degree, but I do think that there is this part of Mars that is really, especially with the conjunction to Neptune, is ready to be that peaceful spiritual warrior, to understand, surrender, and sacrifice for a bigger cause. And the cause in this point is redefinition of the self. So I'm not going to war against people who want to keep putting me back in the same old box. Instead, I'm going to endure and sustain whatever their opinion is and walk towards what my opinion is of myself. That's essentially how that feels to me. This influence goes on for a couple of days. So be mindful, but Mars is more than happy to be home again. Let's go to the 13th. Now, this is where we start to actually feel a little bit of relief from Neptune and Saturn. They're starting to stretch apart, but now we have Mercury and Mars here in the mix. This is really interesting because Mercury is thinking really dreamy in many ways. It's very idealistic at the concepts, the ideas it's coming up with. And what I think is Mercury's going to retrograde. Wait, is Mercury already retrograded? Mercury's already retrograded. I'm sorry. I think here what Mercury's going to do is want to start to write things down, to write these ideas down. And maybe the ideas are flowing so quickly because of the influence of Pluto, bringing things up, being inspired, and then having Neptune and Mars together. Now, here, this feels like creative action to me, spiritual action, spiritual pursuits, bravery, pioneering spirit, exploration. And this, to me, this Mercury feels it's interesting to me because when I get to the anaretic degrees with this configuration, I almost feel like Mercury is anxious to start the daily activities of what the ideas are that are coming in, what that creativity is, what that new dream chapter is. Okay, let's go to April 15th. And the stretch is even bigger. Now we're seeing that Saturn and Neptune are 5 degrees apart. And this, I really do think that this is going to feel a little bit more, it feels like it's going to loosen up a little. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that I am relieved. It means that I'm aware. I'm aware of how I'm thinking, how I'm taking action, and I'm really starting to dig in and implement on a daily basis or on a regular basis this new me. I don't know, maybe you get up and you meditate every morning, or you take a long walk and you pay attention to what nature is saying to you. You pay attention to the type of birds that fly by, or if there's a lizard, or the type of trees that you walk by, because everything in nature has symbolism, and spirit will speak to you through your awareness of that, and then your curiosity about the symbolism. Now, from April 15th until the 26th, this stellium is in play. Let's run to the 26th. That's a long time for these planets to be interacting and chatting. Oh, Mercury's out of the mix. Pardon me, where did Mercury go? Got to look. Oh, Mercury moved past. Okay, let's go back. I'm clicking on Saturn. Again, this is, Mars, the house ruler, in the middle of the house, ready to move, ready to build that sustainable structure, get up first thing in the morning and start pounding the nails of his new life. And I do find it interesting that I'm not keeping the wheel on any particular sign, and we're seeing this in the house of daily activities, the sixth house. And on this day, in this chart, the sixth house is ruled by Pisces, which is Neptune. And let's now just go to the end of the month. And we've got a little bit of a tighter, this 6-degree orb is not tight, but it's not loose quite yet. But it's making beautiful aspect over here to Venus in Gemini. So again, I think that's going to be triggering thoughts, being more aware of my everyday activities, who I'm interacting with, the partnerships I have. And while Mars is still in the mix here, Mars's influence is more, how can I phrase this? Mars has started to pay attention to its own particular journey, how it's going to move forward. In July, Saturn will retrograde until December. It will go from 14 degrees of Aries back down to 7 degrees of Aries, but it will not come back into contact with Neptune for another 1470 years in the sign of Aries. Neptune will also retrograde, but Neptune, the closest they will ever get again for now is Neptune will be at 1 degree of Aries and Saturn will be at 7 degrees of Aries. So for a lot of this year, this is the major player, and it's the most intense in the beginning of the year. It is you're literally laying the concrete to put the foundation of your new house of self on. And with Lilith's influence in those first couple of 6 weeks or so, you could really feel like you're putting your hands on your hips and you're like, I'm standing my ground. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's an exciting time. I think we're going to become more and more co-creative and more empowered and less dependent upon structures that actually suck our energy and deplete us rather than expand us. So again, my name is Terry Hunter. I'm an intuitive astrologer. If you'd like to book a reading with me, I am available. I would suggest a reading with any astrologer, frankly, because these times are so powerful, and where these transits are happening in your chart are pivotal for your future moving forward. So please subscribe, please hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and come back for more content. Thank you so much. Have a great transit.